So today, what date is it? It's the 7th of May, 2025. Take us back to 1995.
94.
94.
Right. I mean, I just remember it being the biggest story of the time. We heard the news that a ferry had capsized, a ferry that many of us many had used, and then the next thing you hear is there's been this major tragedy. But to just highlight what that looked like, this was on April 29th, and the MV Mtongwe ferry capsized, and this was approximately 40 meters from Kilindini Harbor. The result is that 272 people died. That was of 400 passengers of a ferry whose capacity was 300. So there was cause, the responses, of course, the commission, then led by the late Justice Msaga Mogoli, found that the disaster was due to overloading, poor vessel design, lack of maintenance, and weak safety enforcement. Some of the compensation gaps, by 2005, approximately 37 million shillings had been paid out to only 81 of the families. Many others remain uncompensated due to what is termed bureaucracy, documentation gaps, legal hurdles, and low payout amounts. Some even saying that they've been paid as little as 17,000 Kenya shillings. When we're speaking to some of the reforms which have been made, and this is what we want to interrogate today, new ferries, including MV Jambo and MV Safari, introduced from the period between 2010 and 2020, safety regulations improved, ferry operations placed under Kenya Ports Authority. The Dongo bypass constructed to reduce pressure on the Likoni Channel. There's ongoing challenges, obviously, and this is what we want to speak to even as we mark 31 years. Justice for the affected families, something that we've just highlighted. Incidents continue. At some point, we'll be able to highlight and probably show why this decongestion is still a far, far, far time to come. There's still issues around just overpopulate. Is it overpopulating? Overloading the ferry. And so there are incidents that have continued. We've heard them, you know, some vehicles plunging, some collisions, over 300,000 passengers and 7,000 vehicles, by the way, use this service daily. It's a massively used service, which means it has to be regulated. We have to make sure that these ferries are in good service because these are people's lives to and fro every day, whether it's vehicles, whether it's those who are on foot. So, yeah, I think we just need to accelerate plans to expand, first of all, because, again, this speaks to the fact that there is no expansion of those who need to commute. So it overpopulates that one particular space. So that's what happened.
There's what happened in Mtongwe, and we've got to bear in mind that Mtongwe was a different crossing from the Likoni crossing.
Right.
Yes.
And nowadays, what we now have is the Likoni ferry crossing, which is, again, operated by a number of ferries, some ferries working, some, on a certain day, there's ferries out of service, so you have fewer ferries, and the congestion that happens throughout, especially during the peak times, when people are crossing over from one side to the other side, coming from south coast to the north coast, in the morning and in the evening. Huge and serious congestion takes place. Now, the Likoni ferry channel has had various issues. You know, like Janet, you've highlighted, there's, you know, the improvement of bringing in new ferries. And that's the whole conversation there. Do we actually have new ferries that have ever been brought? Or is it refurbished ferries that are brought in as new ones? Then there's the other one. There was the construction of the Liwatoni crossing. And this was meant to decongest the human population that is going to use the ferry by creating another place where there's a bridge, a floating bridge that opens and closes, and pedestrians can use that at Liwatoni, which, again, is it operational today? Is it not? Has it improved the services? So there are very many questions that now, when we say, lest we forget, the Mtongwe ferry disaster happened in 1994, it's about the crossing of the ferry and what happens as the people go there to queue, to get on board of the ferry and to cross the ferry.
We're going to hear from residents, and we have footage of what that ferry crossing looks like. But I think, and we spoke a little bit to this yesterday, you think of the way we do ferry crossings here, it, for lack of a better word, it's very kienyeji, right? If you're going in a vehicle, no one really gives you safety procedure, first of all. You just drive on and that's it. It's you to tell yourself, lower your windows, unlock the doors. There's no sign saying lower, unless better things could have changed. I'm just using, you know, memory from like the last time I crossed the ferry. If you're doing it on foot, even worse. It's almost a stampede, almost always a stampede, especially during rush hour. It's a lot of pushing, shoving. There's a safety issue there from just your physical safety. Someone could easily pickpocket you. There's a, you know, of course, the risk of if things do get too intense, you could be pushed, you could be stampeded. That's part one. Then there's now, again, life vests, all of those safety procedures, something like that. No, you just onto the ferry and you keep crossing. Let's have a look at what that crossing looks like. That's exactly it.
I mean, if that isn't survival for the fittest, into just compromising your life. And remember, as you've mentioned, these are people who know that they cannot wait for another ferry to come because they're pressed for time.
Yes.
So there's that urgency to get across, but at what cost? And then look at the mammoth crowds that are all waiting to use the same service.
And look at the railing that's holding them back. Let's listen in. Right, that's what it looks like. It's intense, it's a stampede. This is 30 years after Mtongwe, 31 years after Mtongwe. What lessons were learned from that? 270 people dead in a ferry that was meant to be carrying 300 but had 400. Again, because of the same issue. People need to get home, they're trying to rush, they stampede, there's no control. And I don't think it's that hard to be able to have people line up and say 300 is the cap. You're person 301, stay back, wait for the next one, or find somewhere to sleep in Mombasa or in Diani, in South Coast, wherever you've come from.
Right, and what you're met with, and we'll see what the residents have to say in just a moment. To your point, it shouldn't be hard to restore order, but I think oftentimes there's such a sense of urgency. Citizens often feel like, as we're on our own, then you're telling me to line up. I don't know that I'm going to make it to pick my child from school in time to get home. So that combination of impatience, whether it's valid or not, urgency, and a sense of maybe weak implementation of rules, it's just kind of everyone for their own. And you can still feel that when you use the ferry today. Cars as well. Some vehicles also don't adhere to certain rules. To your point, they may not be as clear. I think there is some minimal signage, but even making careless mistakes, starting your engine too early, moving too early. So the indiscipline is really across the board. But then again, it comes down to the authority to say, these are just the non-negotiables we're taking. This is how we're trying to ease the congestion. But let's have a listen to what those who often use the ferry have to say.
Mimi naitwa Kidanga. Hapa huduma ferry kidogo ina shida, service za ferry iko chini kidogo kwa sababu ferry zinatuchelewesha sana, zinakwama kama asubuhi nimechelewa kuvuka. Kwa hivyo nataka huduma irekebishwe, watu wafuke kwa haraka.
Usafiri pia ferry watu ongeze hata kama 4.
Pia waongeze staff hapa. Na pia nidhamu ya hao watu wa hapa ferry. Sasa walinzi security hajakuwa kuridhisha. Sababu kuna wakati mwingine hapo kulitokea kisa ambapo watu wengi sana waliumia, watoto na wamama. Hao security walianza kupura watu mawe. Wajua kawaida watu wakienda kazi wanakuwa impatient. Wakiwekwa sana wanakuwa impatient. Sasa wakaruka zile grills.
Changamoto ambayo ninaziona hapa ferry ni kwamba kila mikakati inayowekelewa kuna hali za kupuuza haki za wavukaji, wale ambao hawatozwi ada. Ninaona wengi wanapuuzwa. Kwa mfano, watu hawana sehemu za kukalia wakati wanangojea ferry. Kuna wagonjwa, wengine wanalemewa, wengine hata kuzimia, watu kunyeshewa, kutopata nafasi ya kupumzika. Kuna watu wa baiskeli, wengi wanaketishwa mahali ambapo
same problem. What have we learned since then? Are we still having the same number of ferries operating? Do we need more? Clearly, especially during rush hour. You could say maybe at 12 p.m. it's a few thousand people, but when people, like you said, are going to work, leaving work, trying to get from point A to B, and this is their primary mode. Yeah, do we have enough ferries? Are they well maintained? Yo kukwama. I'm not a person who lives at the coast, but I've kwamad on a ferry, and I'm like, how often does it have to? It could be an isolated incident, but then he speaks to it and he said, you just find yourself kind of floating in the water, and you're like, okay.
It's not isolated.
How long are we going to be here?
Yeah, I noticed over time, you'll find that the services improve and then dip. That is the problem. So shortly after Mtongwe, there's a sense of you don't want anything like that to happen. So but there were just some forms of improving services. I can just remember vividly, ease of congestion, rules and regulations. You saw that those on the ferry who worked there had life jackets, like you could tell, but then it really yo-yos. And then again, it ends up, by the time it's yo-yoing over and over again, something just gets through, and then you go back to. But yeah, 31 years on, and I know we're talking about what's happening now, but even as Eric asked me earlier, can you remember, for some reason, some memories are really coming back to me. I remember stories of people, there was this young man, for example, who missed the ferry. Yeah, so you have all these diverse experiences of, I missed it. And so that shock factor of that could have been me. I remember that was a big story that circulated. Of course, countless stories of those who lost friends and family, stories, I think, of those who are still pursuing justice for their loved ones. But back then, there was a lot of those I almost missed. I actually missed the ferry and felt upset that I had to take another one, and then look what happens. Or somebody saying, you know, I kissed my loved one goodbye and ended up going. So it was a very dark moment and period. It's sad that there's gaps in my memory of it, but I'm sure many who are watching can speak to it and can speak to remembering that day, can speak to remembering those lives that were affected, and then can speak to kind of like the commission that was set up to.
This part as well. The disembarking has cost lives. Was it last year when a mom and her children drowned?
Yeah, and her daughter. Was it a few years ago?
It was a few years ago.
Was it last? It was a couple of, I don't think it was
about
2023. Right, it was about,
when,
yes.
Yeah, it's at the point of she was just driving out and got caught up. The vehicle slid back into the waters, and she was there. We had to bring in rescuers from other countries to come and just
do a rescue mission,
get their bodies out. And it was a very sad story. But these things of what happens at the ferry crossing keep happening. If you just look at in the news, you'll find just this year, on January 15th, February 5th actually, when there was an incident. Somebody was getting out of the ferry, and they wanted to get on board the ferry. A pedestrian jumped over the rail barriers at the mainland waiting bay as he tried to catch a ferry. Now, he was arrested by the security guards who were manning the channel. But the crowd was angered by the manner in which he was manhandled by these security guards. So there was a confrontation between the crowd here and the security guards. Commission started seeing stones being thrown at the guards, and then the guards picked up stones and started retaliating and hitting the pedestrians. Now, those guards were suspended from service. But it just brings you the issue. Why was he crossing over? Why was he jumping over? What is it? He's just thinking, mine time, I've got to cross. I'm running late, let me just see if I can cross. Then the manner of arrest, it's just how people are just handled here, because you're many of you. If you just look at the number of incidences, that just do a casual look at the Likoni ferry and the news stories, will see 3 weeks ago, traffic disruption at Likoni crossing amid vessel breakdown. 7th of February, Likoni ferry, the Mombasa lifeline in crisis. Trader awarded 5.1 million after lorry plunges into ocean at Likoni ferry. Likoni ferry posed danger to passengers due to expired certificates of the ferries. That's the last year. Governor Nasir of Mombasa calling for permanent ban of vehicles from Likoni ferry crossing. The safety concerns resurfacing after bus incident on Likoni ferry crossing on October last year. Then 3 weeks ago, the Daily Nation wrote a story of a man whose lorry plunged into the ocean 15 years ago, getting compensation, 6.1 million shillings. And all this is what you will find. issues about the ferry, there'll be a concern here about safety. All of them, they'll touch on safety.
Right.
Now, so many years down the road, we still have issues of safety. 4 people injured in the Likoni Ferry stampede, August 2024. Probe launched after altercation between KDF and police officers at Likoni Ferry. February, chaos erupts in that one between the security people and pedestrians who wanted to cross the ferry. And on and on and on. So we, like you're saying, it keeps yo-yoing. When you have at least 2-3 ferries operating, they ease off the pressure.
Right.
When one of them breaks down, there's immediate pressure and there's immediate congestion, and then you're going to see safety concerns.
Right. You go into that. Again, I know that we're talking about lest we forget. I think it's important that we're also speaking to some of the operationalization improvements that are needed, which we'll come back to. I do kind of keep going back to that story that's grounding us in Lest We Forget today, and realize that there's tiny little notes that are taken. So let's take you back to that day. It was about between 7 and 8 a.m. The Mtongwe was en route from mainland to Mombasa Island, and then it capsized shortly after departure. We've talked about it. It was carrying hundreds of passengers. It was intended to have a capacity of 300, but it had 400. And then there's survivors' accounts. Survivors and rescuers recounted harrowing experiences from the disaster. And I was speaking to, this is what I was looking for, the stories that came out then. Retired Kenya Navy officer Mike Osinde, who participated in the rescue operations, described the scene as chaotic, with bodies strewn across the water and a desperate search for survivors. One survivor, Ramadan Juma Mwadzengo, suffered a facial injury during the incident. He's been pursuing compensation for decades, but his efforts have been hampered. And those are things that we should hopefully be able to follow up on. Again, I spoke a little bit to some of the aftermath and compensation challenges that in the wake, the Kenyan government pledged compensation to the victims, but as of recent reports, only a portion of the affected families have received this. For instance, there's the family of Thomas Onduto, a 24-year-old who perished in the disaster. They've been seeking compensation for over 3 decades without success. And despite submitting the required documents and following up with relevant authorities, they have yet to receive any financial restitution. So lest we forget, we're just painting this picture of the issues that still persist when it comes to the ferries, but rooting it in this. It was actually described as possibly one of the worst, if not the worst, maritime tragedy, right? And I think that's why it was a global story. It was covered globally. Just sort of serve it as an example of this is what happens when you sidestep things like overcrowding and capacity. So it's really entrenched. So there's still people now. You can imagine the psychosocial support required for those who survived it. You can imagine the pursuit of justice for those who lost a loved one, and for those even in the search and rescue and everything that they had to keep in mind.
Right. 30 years on, Kenya is now commissioning the construction of 2 new ferries from Ozata Shipyard in Turkey. That's from the Kenya Ferry Services. Each ferry will be 85 meters long, capable of carrying up to 60 vehicles, with the aim of improving efficiency and safety at the Likoni crossing. This is 30 years on. The ferries that have been in operation, have they been all since refurbished? Is that why we still have issues of safety, of clearly maintenance issues because breakdowns are common, stalling is common? All these things are, again, 30 years after a disaster of this proportion, we still haven't figured it out. We've opened a new link road, but we said it's not fully open, right? Open.
The Liwatoni Bridge.
Yes, the Liwatoni Bridge. Is the idea then to just have cars use the bridge primarily, have the ferry become for passengers and for pedestrians entirely? I don't know.
Yeah.
Would that ease the traffic?
The Liwatoni Bridge is actually a pedestrian bridge.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and it just opens and closes. It's primarily a pedestrian bridge. It was to ease the congestion at Likoni.
Okay.
Now, some of the complaints or feedback that you'd hear is the distance between this Likoni channel and where Liwatoni is. And some of them saying, okay, so Liwatoni, now you've added a couple of, some distance for me to go, and I'll be walking across the ocean to the other side. And here with the ferry, I was just waiting for the ferry comes, I board, I cross. and it's closer to me, because many people have now built in their businesses around, especially on the Likoni side, near the ferry.
Yes.
Now, how far do we have to walk to the other side? But you also raise another issue here where the ferry services are commissioning, the construction of some ship. This is not the first time. We have seen commissioning of and acquisition of new ferries. And the scandal has been, were they new ferries or were they just refurbished ferries?
Right.
And then you come back locally and ask, do we have the capacity to actually build ships or repair ships? We have a serious port in Mombasa, and we have the capacity to actually repair and do service vessels, marine vessels.
Right.
Kenya Shipyard, which we mentioned yesterday as one of those that's getting an increased budgetary allocation, is run by the military, and it has expertise in marine vessel. Okay? The Kenya Navy, they use this to repair their vessels. The Kenya Shipyard is the one that did the ferry that was now commissioned in Kisumu.
Right.
Helping to transport a lot of goods, and especially petroleum products, from Kisumu port crossing over into Uganda. It was done by the Kenya Shipyards, who also did the port. So if we have the local capacity, what are we doing with our local capacity before we start going to spend a lot more money
outside?
Buying an old vessel and refurbishing it and painting it and then bringing it to Mombasa? Those questions keep emerging.
They do. You talked about some of the decongestion measures, and the governor of Mombasa not too long ago has proposed banning vehicle traffic on the ferry to enhance passenger safety. So those are some of the proposed measures, and providing those alternatives for the vehicles. In terms of technological upgrades, KPA, the Kenya Ports Authority, has introduced automated payment systems, automatic barrier gates, and well-marked roads to streamline operations and reduce congestion. So the automated payment systems, again, that doesn't work all the time. These are all good approaches. They work some days, they don't. And people will say that. It's inconsistent. But that's what KPA had introduced. And then the 24-hour service. Since the Kenya Ports Authority took over operations from the Kenya Ferry Services, the Likoni Ferry now operates around the clock, facilitating the movement of approximately 300,000 passengers. But sometimes it doesn't operate around the clock.
24 hours, that's true.
It doesn't, It's the inconsistency of it, and yet if it worked well as it was, if the governor is saying, we want there to be, the ferry that serves people who are on foot and those who, then let's do that. If you're going to say automated payment systems, I've experienced both automated and then automated haifanyi leo. So, that's also an issue. And then the round the clock, I know people had also expressed concerns. On the one hand, yes, it means that we're able to ease that congestion, but sometimes a lot of people are like, I don't want to be on that ferry at night unless I absolutely have to. Safety concerns, fear concerns, all of that. So there's a streamlining that's missing somewhere. But I think if there is this approach that's done intentionally, it could ease services, because it's serving so many people, so many businesses, so many people who are going to school, if only we can streamline it and avoid what we're seeing on the screens right now.
What we're seeing here is footage that was just done by a cameraman in Mombasa yesterday, right? So this is just latest footage of just this Likoni ferry crossing. It's a daily occurrence where thousands of people will come and they want to access the ferry just to cross. What's the distance of this channel? It's actually a very short distance if you compare to other places where you see ferry crossings. The distance is such a short distance, but so many people who need to use it. But then it's the reliability of the equipment that's used for ferrying.
Right.
Last year in October, 6 passengers, a driver and a conductor of an Ukunda-bound minibus, escaped death by a whisker after the bus failed to climb the steep hill and overturned at the Likoni ferry crossing channel. The bus was coming from Machakos. Luckily, it had only 6 passengers on board, including a mother and her 2 children, after other passengers alighted before it crossed to the mainland side of the channel. According to eyewitnesses, the bus was obstructed by a fully loaded handcart, mkokoteni, with market products. These are daily occurrences, as in you are not sure, even as you get onto this ferry, whether what's going to happen on the other side. A bus could be trying to move up, a truck could be trying to, the ones that carry trucks, they in fact tell people, don't board here because we are carrying some special cargo. But it's always one issue
after the other.
After the other.
Where's also the room for information, letting people know what safety procedures exist as they get on the ferry. I think that can be done in good time. It doesn't have to be a whole thing that now delays ferry services because you're giving people a safety briefing. But I don't think it's too much to give a 1-minute safety briefing when people get onto that ferry or get off, right? For vehicles, for passengers as well. These are the basics of, get on, get off safely. Because a lot, like the running, the stampeding is clearly unsafe. Some of those vehicles are so close, you're like, they're just about to get on the ramp. It's like, again, one wrong move and you're in the water. Are we doing enough to let people know the safety procedures as they get on and off a ferry? Are we doing enough to make sure that there's also safety equipment, for example, whether it's life vests that are easily available, whether it is putting guardrails up on either side that are high enough, whether it is having spikes or something to stop cars from potentially going into the water. All of those are valid questions, and those are structural issues that can be dealt with. Then also letting people know it's okay to miss this ferry, there'll be another one coming, and make it so that there is really another one coming. It's 24 hours. You can miss this one, you'll get the next one.
Those are such good points you've raised, and then they're all interconnected. The part of now passenger safety, I know sometimes there's actually announcements as well in the ferry. Again, it's a very short trip. So people are like, it's by the time, I'm trying to think logistically whether it just needs to be a very loud announcement of safety measures that just runs throughout, because you're on and the next thing you're off. Right? So again, the whole thing is done with a spirit of impatience. Sometimes you're like, sis, your life is on the line. I need you to step away from where you are. Right. Or bro, they have tried to put barriers. Sometimes people lean over and you have to have a few guys come around and be like, what are you doing? But all that is because I realize everything happens so quickly. So sometimes people don't even settle. You enter, you're still trying to squeeze your way through and lean, and by the time you look, ushafika. So, and then to your point about, there's another ferry coming, the ferry breakdowns is what has caused people to be a bit unhinged. They're like, you're telling me there's another ferry coming.
I can't see it.
I can't see it, and I'll be here for 8 hours and I have a shift.
Right.
So it's all connected. The congestion is because there's also a lack of trust in the services.
And it's not just the ferry. We operate the same way with trains too. People will hang onto trains, like on the outside.
Because it's the last one.
Because it's the last one operating that day. That's it. That's exactly it.
Lest we forget soon, I think we'll also talk about that very tragic train accident that happened, I think it was in 1993, again, with some passengers from the coast losing their lives. It was, again, one of the worst train disasters we've had. We've had a lot of them. But so what have we learned? What was the upgrade like? I know that we now have, services have since obviously improved. We have SGR, etc. But that, again, marked a milestone moment for something that should have been on top of people's minds in terms of the servicing of the train, etc., etc. Can I read an account?
Yes.
This is somebody we've mentioned, which was one of the rescue missions. I'll just read. And again, you can find all this information, obviously, online. It's available. April 29th, 1994 was a dark day for the country. People cried in shock and disbelief as time dragged by, dashing hopes of more survivors being found, as people, unfortunately, as the ferry sank 40 meters from the land. All the while, a team of divers was hard at work. The divers stayed put even when the rescue mission slowly turned into, unfortunately, a recovery mission. One of those people at sea was Mike Osinde, who was a Kenya Navy officer, then a captain. When he was kind of interviewed for this specific article, he said it was early morning when we were reporting on duty. We saw a multitude near MV Mtongwe Jetty. This was 200 meters from the Kenya Navy headquarters where Osinde's office was, and the clearance diving unit. Upon learning about the ferry accident, he and other divers quickly changed into their diving gear and dashed to the scene. After a quick briefing to the other divers, they got down to work. Civilian divers joined in the rescue and recovery operations, which went on the whole day. It was risky. All the divers had to stay focused to avoid drowning in their efforts to save other people. As time went by, the rescue mission turned into a recovery mission since most of the people had stayed for hours in the water, unfortunately, were presumed dead. A plan to refloat the ferry was executed. This was then his brush with death. Osinde says he ran out of oxygen at the bottom of the Indian Ocean while trying to find a fine spot to tie the lifting strap on the sunken ferry. In his words, I got stuck for several minutes and could not pull myself out. I was pulling the heavy lifting strap all the way from the top, about 30 meters, to the bottom of the sea. The strap made my entanglement worse, and I was running out of air. I had to think fast and get out. Otherwise, I was going to die trying to recover already dead passengers. He was stuck at the seabed with only 5 minutes of air left in his oxygen reserve tank. He realized the end was nigh and it was a countdown clock. But it took quite a struggle to disentangle himself. He says he was able to come out of it unscathed. Baffled medics and his fellow divers were just like, oh, you're okay, you've survived, okay. He abandoned the strap and pulled himself. The entire rescue mission took 2 weeks. It goes on to say that he was awarded the Order of the Grand Warrior by then President Moi. But it says that he still gets chills to date. So that's a first-hand account of a rescue mission. You can imagine 2 weeks, search and rescue becomes recovery. And we see that all the time, even civilians jumping in, which is very unsafe. But you know, when you're going from search and rescue to recovery, you are desperate to find your loved ones.
Now imagine that happened in 1994. And more than 20 years later, 20 plus, 25 plus years later, an incident happens where a vehicle with one woman and one child goes into the water, and we do not have the capacity to actually retrieve this one vehicle. Okay? 20 years later, we have this Likoni crossing. We can see pedestrians, we can see the ferry, we know there's a possibility. We see all the time vehicles moving back, like the truck moves back, gets into the ocean. But our capacity to react and respond swiftly is still that slow, right? Because what happened then with this particular one, where we took more than a week to actually just retrieve the bodies of the woman and her child, it just paints that bad picture. We don't have the situational awareness, the capacity to actually react quickly. Kenya Navy divers came. They were trying to get there. It was at a bad spot in the water. It's a channel underneath where there's a heavy current. But still, all that is known. We got to a situation where we were not able to react 20 plus years later. So if a Likoni ferry disaster were to happen today, and God forbid, we would not have the capacity. We would still be dealing with the same of trying to address it. We have Jacqueline from Kisumu who's on the line, and she'd like to contribute to this. Good morning, Jacqueline.
Good morning.
Thank you for calling in. Tell us your account and your thoughts about the ferry and safety.
I was just about my side in 1994.
So we're having a challenge with your line. Let's see if we can call you back. Let's see if we can get you back on the line, and then we'll pick you. But yeah, I think she wants to just give an account of what happened in 1994 from the side of it. We talked about the Liwatoni ferry. A story that was done by the Daily Nation in 2022 was talking about this 1.9 billion Likoni floating bridge in Mombasa, which was commissioned by the president, and it was launched at the peak of the COVID-19 pandemic. The bridge from Liwatoni to Bofu opened to the public on Christmas Day, with hundreds seizing the opportunity to take photos to capture the moment. Now, this was coming to address the issue at Likoni, which has 300,000 pedestrians and 6,000 vehicles crossing there daily. First of its kind in East Africa. It's a good bridge. You know, it lifts, it opens and closes. But then the Daily Nation went 2 years later and asked, okay, mnaonaje hii Liwatoni? They were lamenting the bridge is too far. To get to it, one has to either walk or board a boda. The additional transport expenses to get to the bridge have been cited among the reasons preventing pedestrians from using it. Faiza Binti, for example, said it's hectic for her to use the bridge. We had raised the issue of setting up a shed, but the government turned a blind eye to it. At least they would have considered setting up benches along the walking path for one to rest. A pregnant woman who lives near the bridge cannot use it because it's a long walk. She'd have to use the shorter ferry route. Emmanuel Kazungu said, why would I pay 50 bob for the matatu to ferry me to the bridge when I can pay 20 bob for the same vehicle to take me to the ferry crossing? Another issue is that the rainy season does not favor us. Not everyone has an umbrella, nor shade, you know, and so on and so forth. So this was the issue with the Liwatoni floating bridge. Last year, when President William Ruto was having town halls in Mombasa, he assured the Mombasa residents that he'll address the prolonged delays of, the ferry, the Mtongwe. But before I come to the Mtongwe one, he was talking about the issue at Liwatoni. He said, we've closed Liwatoni because Liwatoni was causing a lot of congestion at the port. It's taking over 10 hours for ships to wait to cross.
10 hours.
Because when you bring down the bridge,
the ships have to wait.
The ships have to wait. Now when you open, by the time your meli gurumisho kuja ingia kwa port, it's just causing the congestion. So what the president did is he promised tutapanga to build a bridge that will address this issue.
Ingine sasa?
Yeah, ingine.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Again, how do we approach public infrastructure? When you're building a bridge like that, that's going over a place where ships cross, you're telling me no one has thought about the traffic that will be caused when the bridge is down and the ships aren't crossed?
So that's why it was actually a floating bridge. It opens, it closes.
But if it
to address
closes,
the traffic issues.
If it closes, that means you're stopping traffic at that time.
Yeah, and basically you're operating with the port and seeing how to organize so that at this peak time we shall close so that people can cross. At this off-peak time we can open so the ships can cross in. Now there's a whole issue.
But
because either way,
a basic feasibility study would have told you that if the bridge is down for 2 hours a day, that leads to an 8-hour delay. Because yes, a ship is not like a car. You start the engine, you vroom.
Yeah.
Right?
I guess it's the planning of it, because there are many other places where we have those floating bridges. It comes, it closes, vehicles pass or pedestrians pass, and then the marine vessels pass. Floating bridges on rivers, floating bridges on oceans and seas, happens elsewhere. So here he said, the president, that in March last year he had a meeting with the Prime Minister of Japan. Na tukakubaliana that he's going to give us 100 billion shillings for the construction of the Likoni Bridge. The bridge will enable us to do away with the ferries. Be patient while I get the contractor to do the work. It's a new bridge.
You know, bridge suggestions have been there for 30, 40 years.
Forever.
You wait, every year you're like, the bridge is coming.
There'll be a bridge.
Next year, the bridge is coming.
Yeah.
In fact, the government of Japan had proposed, and through JICA again, JICA did the Nyali Bridge. They sponsored the construction of the Nyali Bridge. They had also proposed to do a bridge at Likoni for ferry crossing. Oh, this and the other, maneno mingi. Now here they were, last year, President talking to the Prime Minister of Japan, tusaidia hii maneno, okay, 100 billion shillings. Now the President said, give me time, I look for a contractor.
Is the contractor not JICA?
No, it depends on what they had agreed. I don't know.
Yeah,
the 70-meter planned Mombasa Gate Bridge is to link Likoni and Mombasa. And also remember there's a Dongo Kundu side. Dongo Kundu also decongests, right? Dongo Kundu, the highway, the bypass, is meant to decongest as well. So some vehicles use Dongo Kundu. If you're just going all the way to the north coast, you're not coming to Likoni itself town, then you can just use the Dongo Kundu bypass, go get Dongo Kundu, cross over into the other side. There are very many vehicles that would use the Dongo Kundu bypass. Many others that then would use the Mombasa Gate Bridge that would, just crossing over from the Likoni side and you're going to Mombasa Island, then you can use that.
There's also issues around, it's a bit of a segue, now that you mentioned Nyali Bridge, there's also congestion concerns around it. Talk of a second Nyali Bridge, there's a lot of construction around, so there's already safety concerns. The coast has grown significantly, so the Nyali Bridge at the time wasn't necessarily experiencing heavy congestion and traffic. Now it's, I think, quadrupled from back then. And when there's traffic at a standstill on a bridge that is not meant to be congested, that's another safety concern. So we've not...
So there's concerns about the bridge being able to hold that much weight. Okay.
So we are not... and then, of course, that's why there's talk of a second one. But we need to catch up with how people are... with how populations are increasing. There's huge demand for that area going into Nyali. Needless to say, it has expanded monumentally it's great for business, etc., but the infrastructure not supporting it is always going to be a concern. So the same way Likoni, the famous bridge hasn't come to be, is the same concern that people have around Nyali Bridge. I would just treat these with urgency because of the way the population is growing. And it will continue to. The demand is still growing, so population sizes will grow, and one bridge can't serve that number of people. So there we are.
Or two ferries.
Or two ferries. It's unfortunate we couldn't get to our caller.
Yeah.
But may her uncle rest in peace. We're getting information that she lost her uncle during the Mtongwe ferry disaster. And to all Jacqueline and all those who lost family and friends. It was indeed a very dark day in our history.
Yep.
As mentioned, many are still pursuing justice for compensation that was promised.
Right.
Oh yeah, let me just recap what the president said again during a town hall. Last week, President Ruto has assured Mombasa residents that he will address the prolonged delays witnessed in the resumption of Mtongwe ferry services, and also addressing the issue of compensation and saying all those that were affected, the government is still working with them.
It's 31 years though.
That's the issue.
Okay.
Seeking justice for 31 years.
Yep.
We spoke about one of the victims who was 24, would have been 55 now.
Oh, that's heartbreaking.
Yeah. That just gives you a little bit of context.
Yeah.
We have to wrap up the show, but we will leave you in the capable hands, of course, of Sylvia and Winnie on Your World. And today we're talking about rent forever or buy a home. Is home ownership still the dream? I think for a lot of younger people, the dream... Oh, nimesema Mwikalina.
In fact, I was like, maybe it's another name.
Pole. Mwikalina Winnie, pole.
It's okay.
Yes, we will be speaking to them in just a bit about, is the dream of home ownership still alive? I think for a lot of young people, it's gotten further and further out of reach. And it's like, okay, let me just get resigned to this idea of renting, because I look at what it costs to buy a quarter acre, an acre of land in an urban area. And those numbers are just crazy.
Yeah. It's a far away dream.
We talked about it. It's also a new, it's a generational thing.
Right.
Yeah? The current younger generation is basically looking at, why put money into a long-term investment while I can be, spending money per use. I live here, I pay rent, I can have 4 different houses. Nikijisikia leo nataka kukaa Kilimani naenda hapo hivyo nalipa for the night. And then tomorrow.
I think we need to at some point speak to, because people are also shifting their perceptions of success. Home ownership has also been a success factor. Obviously, it has a million other advantages. Yeah. But to your point, people are shifting perspectives. I don't need to, if I can for the moment, afford this, and it's still serving me. So we'll speak to the pros and cons of that. I'd be very curious as a millennial, caught between two worlds. I'd be very curious to unpack that. But yeah, thank you so much for being with us on Fixing the Nation. Janet Mbogwa, Eric Latif, Mariam Bishar. Philo is kicking us out. He's like, thank you.
Thank you,
in
bye.
Our ear. Thank you, bye.
Bye.
But thank you to our fixers. We'll be back here again tomorrow morning, 6 a.m. But you can find all of these conversations on our Fixing the Nation playlist on the NTV YouTube page. Thank you so much for engaging with us. We'll be back here tomorrow at 6. See you then.